Hi, for everyone that don't know, I'm Kendra Faust. I am the president of the Friends of Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge. We are a 501c nonprofit celebrating our 25th year celebrating our National Wildlife Refuge complex with youth development, public use projects, and most recently land acquisitions and restorations. We are located along the southern shore of Lake Erie near Oak Harbor in some of the most critical wetland habitats in the world. If you are interested in learning more about us and what we do, a link will be added to the chat in just a moment. This link will point you in the right direction to become a member, make a tax-deductible donation to support our work, or even shop our online store. Today, I'm joined by Amy Stone. She is the Ag Natural Resource Educator in Lucas County. Amy has worked for OSU for 30 years. Her background includes horticulture, urban forestry, and invasive species. She has graciously joined us today to share her program, All Eyes Needed. Learn how to identify and report spotted lanternflies. Before we begin, I ask that you stay muted and to minimize your background noise for our presenter. Please type any questions in the chat box as we go, and we will have time for Q&As at the end of the program. And now I will turn it over to Amy to get started.
Thanks, Kendra. Well, I'm glad that you're here joining me tonight. And with every program that I do, you're assigned a little homework. And so that homework is to find something along the way that you've learned and are engaged in, which hopefully there'll be more than one thing, but to really share that information in the next week. And so we, as you will see, really need extra eyes out in the field helping us look for the spotted lanternfly. And so hopefully by the end of my presentation, you'll feel confident on what you're looking for, and then also how to report. And there's a couple different options that we're going to walk through today. So let's make sure this is working here. All right. So this is a map of where spotted lanternfly is known to exist. And you can see it's across multiple states, and in some states it's very prevalent. Let's say Pennsylvania, where it all started back in 2014. But if you look at Ohio, there's only 3 designated counties that have reproducing populations. And we'll talk about what that means and how that is identified. You'll also notice there's a couple counties in Indiana and a new county in Michigan, just to the north of us. And so as we progress this season and into future years, we're anticipating that these finds are going to increase. And so the important role of knowing what to look for and then how to report that. And so we need extra eyes. And so I'm hoping that you'll be engaged to be those extra set of eyes to look for this insect. And so we're going to talk about the life cycle in just a little bit, but right now is probably the easiest stage of the insect to identify. The insect is in the adult stage, which is the largest stage between the nymphs and the adults. And you can see they're very colorful. Some people would call them attractive. And so eyes are drawn to them. And so this is how we're getting the reports just recently. And I'll show you some of those reports that are coming in through one of the avenues that we're suggesting that you report them. So spotted lanternfly is another invasive species that's on our radar, and we, in Extension, really want to engage in awareness and increase what people are looking for, and then how to report that. We work with our partners, including the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, the Ohio Department of Agriculture, and of course, the United States Department of Agriculture, as everybody has kind of their role as it relates to invasive species. So hopefully in the end, you will be joining the battle of this bug. We do have educational materials that are available. So if you have specific events coming up, or like a counter that has a lot of public traffic, that you would like to have one of these displays. They're not huge, so they don't take up a lot of space, but we're just trying to, again, get the word out. We also have these identification cards that fit at the bottom of the display. And so you can become a card-carrying member of the spotted lanternfly. It tells you what to look for. If you are engaging with youth, but it doesn't necessarily always have to be youth. We have tattoos, and so that kind of gains some interest. And we also have these resin. It's kind of hard to see because they're clear, but I'll try to put them up against my skin there. These are actually 3D printed models of the insect. And so often when we do presentations, it's nice to have those because you can actually see the size of the insect that we're encouraging you to look for. And we are trying to kind of gain volunteers that will help us in this. I want to start out, if you see any information on spotted lanternfly, a lot of that information is coming out of states that have really high infestations and the insect is very widespread. And so often they're asking people to scrape egg masses and destroy egg masses as part of their campaign to manage this invasive insect. But in Ohio, we want to make sure that we're reporting it first. We want to make sure that it gets confirmed, that location identified, before we go ahead and scrape and remove all of the egg masses. The same is true with the nymphs and the adults. And so Pennsylvania has done a remarkable job about getting the word out about stomping spotted lanternfly. And so people have heard that message and they will call us or, talk to us at an event and say, okay, so if I see it, do I stomp it? In Ohio, we want you to collect it first, right? We want you to take a picture of it. We want it to be confirmed, especially when it's that first infestation or discovery in a county. And so unfortunately, we are probably going to get to the point where there can be a free-for-all of stomping all spotted lanternfly. But at this point, we want to make sure that people are collecting that. And so we've come up with a little slogan of our own that we're trying to get the word out. And it's, if you detect it, collect it. And so that can be done in a variety of different ways. So we're going to collect that information either online, using our phones if we have a smartphone, maybe taking a photo of it. If you can grab the actual specimen, we would love to have that. And probably the best thing to do is make sure that it's contained and get it in a freezer. And so that act will actually kill the insect, but it'll preserve it until we can get it in the right hands for positive identification. So I'm going to do my presentation just a little bit different this time, and we're going to talk and we're going to kick it off with how to report, because that's really important. And then we'll get into what you're looking for and when. And so the one way that the public, professionals, anybody in Ohio can report spotted lanternfly here in the Buckeye State is going to the Ohio Department of Agriculture's website. And I'm going to switch my screen really quickly here. I'm going to do a new share. I can do that. And we're going to look at their website. And so just with a nod of a head, are we seeing the ODA website?
We're seeing the Ohio of Agriculture website with the pictures of lanternflies.
Perfect. Okay. So they have a website and a web page specifically designed or designated for spotted lanternfly. And if you look where my arrow is, there's a general information and then there's a report suspect information. And it is just a web form that you would fill out. So what would happen is if you would suspect that you see spotted lanternfly, you would capture it, you would collect the image, and then you could make this observational request on their website. And so it's going to ask for when you saw the insect, what your name is, a contact phone number, email, address, county. And hopefully, you know what, I bet you it's not going to, yep, so we've got to fill this out. But then you go on to next and it'll describe the location where you found it. And so if you have the GPS coordinates or a very site specific address, but let's say you were out at Ottawa Wildlife Refuge and you came across what you thought, right? So there's no specific address for that location. I mean, the refuge has an address, but not within the larger area. So any description or photos that would kind of alert people to the exact location where you found that would be important. Now the next, we're going to go back to the slideshow here. Let's see. So it's here. New share. And then I think, okay. All right. So we're back to the PowerPoint. And I want to talk about an app that you can actually use. So you can go to the website, you can make that app, that report. If you're not real comfortable online, you could actually call or email them with the information too. So whatever's the easiest way. The other application is the Great Lakes Early Detection app, which actually is about all invasive species, not just spotted lanternfly. Now, in this situation, what we'd like people to do is to actually report one of the insect's favorite host, which is tree of heaven. So if you become familiar with that host plant, you can actually record that on the app. And so what you do is go into your app store, whether it's an iPhone or an Android, you could type in Great Lakes EDN, and it would come up where you would open this app. It's a free app, but it's rather large because it goes across a lot of different invasive species, including aquatics, trees, shrubs, wildlife, insects, and diseases. But once you have that downloaded on your phone, you'll see here the screen that you can make up your own kind of species categories unless you want to see them all. You'll also notice that there's a point where you can do negative reports that we're going to talk about in a second. And some people say, well, negative reports, why would you want to know about negative information? But negative reports allows us to know that people are out there looking. And so I'll give you an example of that. Know that when you're out in the field recording data, it all goes into a queue. One thing that we learned is that often when we're out using the app, we might be in areas where cell phone reception isn't the greatest. And then it tries to upload our information and it's using up data. And so what happens is those reports go in the queue. And once you get back to a more reliable internet or maybe Wi-Fi, then you can hit upload and then we get all those reports at once. So saving you hopefully some data on your phone. So you can see here's some different categories within the app that you might be using. And this app could be used for spotted lanternfly, but for other things as well. So let's say we want to report a tree of heaven. And so this may be the first step in the kind of the spotted lanternfly effort. And so you would scroll down to find spotted or tree of heaven. You would take that photo. In this particular place, this was actually a group of volunteers. So they identified the trees, so it was easier to see. They made that report. They took the photo. They said it was positive because that tree was actually there. They saved it, and then it went into the queue. The next step for spotted lanternfly is to look on that tree to see if you see any signs or symptoms of spotted lanternfly. So you'd scroll through, you'd go to insects, you'd choose spotted lanternfly, and then you would make that report. So let's say I am out at that tree of heaven that I've identified. There is no signs or symptoms of spotted lanternfly. So I'm going to do a negative report. And so that will tell people like myself and the Department of Agriculture that, hey, there's somebody in the area that's monitoring for spotted lanternfly, and they're not seeing it. So you could go back weekly to do that. You could do it every other week, once a month, but it's kind of, you choose a location that's really convenient to you, maybe in your neighborhood or on your way to work. And that would be one thing that you could do to help us monitor and look for spotted lanternfly by making those negative reports if you don't see anything. Now, let's say you get out there one time though, and you see something that you think, oh my goodness, that's spotted lanternfly. You would walk through those same steps, but instead of negative, you would hit positive on that report. And then that would come to us for verification. So remember, if you're using the Great Lakes Early Detection app, they're going to go into the queue. And then at some point, when you have that more reliable internet or Wi-Fi, they'll all be uploaded at once. And often, like today, I was sitting at my computer and there were like 5 different reports that came in. So we knew somebody was out in the field. They made it back to the Wi-Fi, and then they made those reports active for us to verify. Now, I want to just take a second. Thanks for kind of bearing with me as I switch back and forth, but I think it's really kind of interesting that you see these different things. And so we're going to go from the ODA website to kind of the backside of what I see when these reports are made. And I want to share with you this one report, and you can see the species is all across the board, right? So this is tar spot of corn, which is something that I don't deal with. But if we scroll down here to this report that Mike Murray made, it was on spotted lanternfly. And so I'm going to click on this report. And this is what I see from the backside of that Great Lakes Early Detection report that Mike made. He has 2 photos that he took. So definitely spotted lanternfly on this sycamore. And he did a larger kind of view of the tree with the insect right there. He used the GPS coordinates of his phone. And so it shows me exactly where in Cleveland that report was made. And then he could also put in additional comments down here if he wanted to. And so then I can go through and claim the record and review and release that, yes, that is spotted lanternfly. So we're going to switch back to the PowerPoint here real quick. Share. Going to do screen 3. Okay. So those are the 2 ways that you can report. Now, I mentioned ODA, and so they're the regulatory authority in the state, and they will be getting all of those records. So even if you use the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app, that information is provided to them. Just find, there we go. So now let's talk a little bit, and this may be a review for many, or it may be brand new information. But the life cycle of the spotted lanternfly, it has 1 generation per year, and currently it's in the adult stage. There may be some 4th instar nymphs that are lagging, but primarily they're going to be all in the adult stage. They're finding mates and laying eggs that will spend as eggs all winter until next spring when they hatch. So you can see here, this is kind of like a timeline of what to look for when. And so if we go into the egg mass stage, they're in that stage for 9 months. And so it gives us a long window to look for them, but sometimes they can be tricky. They can blend into certain surfaces. These egg masses can be laid on anything. And so in one situation in Cleveland, they were laid on a fence that was covered with grapevine. And so they were really difficult to detect until the leaves fell off the grapes because they were hidden underneath where the vines were. In the spring, so April through July, those eggs are going to hatch into what we call the nymphs. They go through 4 stages. The first stage, people almost describe them as tick-like. So they're very small, they're black with white spots. And they kind of have that same coloration in first, second, and third instars. At the 4th instar, they actually have red on their body. And so that kind of draws your eye just a little bit more. And then finally, they become adults where they mate and reproduce. All stages, the nymphs and the adults feed, causing some plant damage. Here's just another way to kind of look at what we're looking for when, right? Because that's really important. Again, kind of the bar graphs showing you when they're in the eggs, when they're nymphs, and when they're adults. When it comes to the eggs, we're really concerned about long movement, right? So let's say those eggs get laid on a trailer. And so wherever that trailer gets moved to and wherever it is the following spring, those eggs can hatch and it could be a brand new population. The eggs could be laid on stone, outside the house, on trees, on shrubs, so any really flat surface. So that can be problematic. Let's say if the eggs are laid in a nursery and then that nursery grower ships plants out. And so there are quarantines and regulations to try to reduce the spread of the insect from that artificial way. We do know that the adults are weak flyers. And so, in fact, instead of just flying, they would actually prefer to kind of climb up to the highest point. So whether it's a utility pole, a cell phone tower, maybe a silo out in kind of rural areas, and they would kind of catapult off or leap off of that high structure and kind of glide to get from one place to another. They can also hitchhike. And so let's say you're visiting family or friends in an area that the infestation is really high. You leave your trunk open or your back door open as you're getting in and out or packing up your vehicle. They are known to fly into the vehicle, kind of stow away. And then when you get home, you open up the door. Well, they're probably going to fly out to find some food to eat. And so we have noticed that that's happened. So we actually encourage people to be really careful when they're going into an area that's infested, and to, when they come out, to maybe even go through a car wash and wash your vehicle to make sure you don't have any hitchhikers underneath the vehicle or on the outside of the vehicle. This insect is a plant hopper. So it uses a piercing, sucking mouth part to pierce into a plant and suck the sugars from that plant. So they're sap suckers. The adult, which is the largest stage, is about 1 inch long and a 1/2 inch wide when the wings are tucked in. So obviously much larger when they expand those wings. Here's some examples of foods that they prefer or feed on. So they love grapes and apples, cherries, hops, walnuts, maples. So all kind of plants of concern, especially if you're a producer of one of those commercial crops. Their key host, though, however, is tree of heaven, that invasive tree that we talked about when we were talking about reporting. So populations can get relatively high. And so just imagine, this photo was taken in an apple orchard in Pennsylvania, the top left-hand photo. And just imagine you out with your family going to a U-pick orchard and you reach in to grab that apple. And I mean, the stems are actually moving because there's so many spotted lanternfly there. And so as they feed, they produce excrement, which is called honeydew. And it can be a really sticky substance. It's a sugary substance. So the sugars that they don't use in their own system is digested through the insect and then kind of squirted out the back end, which can be a real mess. And that's probably the big concern, is that it's a nuisance in its number and it can be a really messy insect. in addition to the feeding damage that occurs. They are not outright killers like some of our other insects that we've had to deal with, like emerald ash borer or Asian longhorn beetle, but yet still very serious. So this is a list that Virginia has put together, and the print is a little bit small, but it's kind of indicates like where they commonly lay eggs as it relates to trees. But like I had mentioned earlier, any flat surface can be a place where an egg mass is laid. The next list are some of those that are kind of high preferenced as far as food choices. Researchers have observed this insect feeding on probably more than 100 different trees and shrubs and plants right now. They'll actually even attack roses in a rose garden or in a perennial garden, and even some of our plants that we have commonly grown in a vegetable garden. Often it's more the nymphs that have that wide host range, where the adults really try to kind of focus in more on the ailanthus and the grapes. So just as we kind of have to figure out, okay, what time of the year it is and what are we going to be looking for when, we can also do that with their food preference. And so as you see here, the host plants are on the left-hand side. And so rose is right up at the top. And you'll notice the nymphs in May and June, so early on, will feed on roses, but then they don't feed on roses as they get older or even in the adult stage. So if I have a rose garden or a rose plant, I'm going to look in May and June, but I'm not going to go back and look in the rose for spotted lanternfly in, let's say, September or October, because they're just probably not going to be there. You will notice, though, there's two bands that have from the very beginning to the very end, and that's the grapes and the tree of heaven. Black walnut, just the nymphs normally, but usually they're the like third and fourth instar nymph, so a little bit later. You'll notice river birch, so late nymphs, but the adults. And then maples, our very last host plant here on this table, is just adults. So I wouldn't look for spotted lanternfly on maple trees early in the season. I'd wait until later in the season if I'm out monitoring. So here are some photos of those egg masses. And the one thing I want to point out with egg masses is that they change over time. And so the egg masses that are laid like this fall look very different in the spring after they've spent all winter outside. And so they kind of age and maybe deteriorate just a little bit. So they're really shiny, kind of a gray color, almost like a paint, right? When they just are freshly laid, because she covers up the eggs with this substance that kind of protects them. But then as the season progresses, that kind of cracks, or it looks to me, reminds me more of mud. And so you can see we've got an uncovered egg mass up here. So those are the individual eggs that are laid kind of in rows or chains that never got covered for some reason. Here's one that got covered, but it's aging. It's not that real smooth kind of gray color. It's more mud-like in appearance. This just kind of illustrates how the insects, both as a nymph and adults, feed. So they suck into the phloem and get those sugars and take that away from the plant. Sometimes you'll see some of that sap kind of run after they've removed their mouth parts. Additionally, we talked about the excrement, that honeydew, and that can kind of resemble this as well, that kind of sticky substance. So you've got the wounds from their feeding injury. And then sometimes at the base of the plant, we've noticed kind of this white, kind of moldy growth. And so again, something to look for. And we've also noticed in the fall that bees, wasps, and hornets, yellow jackets, are attracted to this honeydew. So just like they're attracted to that can of soda that you have that you're drinking at a party during the summer or a festival, they're drawn to this honeydew. And so if you see an accumulation of these insects, it might be something to really kind of look further and see if you can see any signs and symptoms of the spotted lanternfly along with those stinging insects. We do know that whenever we try to get the word out about people looking and monitoring for spotted lanternfly, they're going to come across other insects. And some of those insects, they may think look similar, or maybe insects that they've never seen before. And so Virginia Tech has put this identification kind of comparison with adults that some people commonly get confused with spotted lanternfly. And when you put them side by side, you can really identify, oh yeah, that's spotted lanternfly. But just imagine that feeling, you're excited, you're empowered, you want to go out and help look for this insect, and you get out and you see something that you think, oh my gosh, it's colorful, it's bright. Is this what Amy was talking about? And so that Bella moth will commonly get confused. I'm seeing a lot of Alanthus webworm. And again, side by side, they really don't look similar, but when it's out there by itself, it's going to capture your attention. And so it may cause a little bit of confusion. We've also had photos of the tiger moth, the buck moth, and the leopard moth. And so some of that is just kind of its moth appearance that draws people to that. There is the oak tree hopper that, when you look at how the insect holds its wings, can sometimes be confused. And because the oak tree hopper is a plant hopper, you'll often see them on the stems feeding the same way that spotted lanternfly would. They've also done a nice job of comparing the egg masses. So the egg mass of spotted lanternfly with some other egg masses that people might commonly get confused with. And so another good resource to have. I know I've printed them off and laminated them, so I have them in my car and take them out for educational programs and events, just to get people to see what some similarities could be. And finally, they did that with the nymphs as well. Know that if you want to learn more and have a resource at your fingertip, Ohio State University partnered with Central State University, Ohio's other land grant, to create a fact sheet about being alert for spotted lanternfly. And that was written by Ashley Kulhanek and Jamie with Central State. The other thing that I want to mention, and I think it's really important, when we think about spotted lanternfly, we have to think about kind of the way it's getting to these new areas. It is definitely a hitchhiker. So that may include roads, so rest stops, gas station, truck stops. And so if you have any of those high trafficked patterns around you, these would be good places to kind of monitor or look. We also know that the railways are a key way this insect is moving from place to place. And so whether the egg masses are being laid on the train cars and then wherever that vehicle is in the spring, and the nymphs, jump off, or we've seen where adults have kind of just grabbed onto those train cars, and then as they see spotted lantern, or see tree of heaven or a host plant, or the train stops, they can kind of catapult off. And so this would be another avenue of how this insect can get to a location near you. We can never, forget, firewood as a potential threat, how to move this insect, nursery stock, and of course, recreational vehicles, campers, things like that. And so we just have to be aware of our surroundings, whether or not we're going in or out of an infested area, and not want to bring them back to an uninfested area. We really rely on individuals. This gentleman is from Jefferson County, and he found one of the first spotted lanternflies, actually the first spotted lanternfly in the state of Ohio. And a neighboring business, it actually collected in their window, and they were fly fishermen. And so the person that was in that building took it to the neighbor and said, hey, look what I found. Wouldn't this be great for fly fishing? And just it happened that he had just read an article in the local paper. This was in the fall of 2020 about spotted lanternfly and kind of ready to be on the lookout for it. It hadn't been identified in Ohio yet. And he's like, no, this is a bad thing. And so he then went through the channels to report that. So what can you do? Hopefully you stay up to date. Things change rather quickly. And by that, I mean, so today, there have been a lot of one-offs that are being reported. And so we're not sure how that insect is getting to that destination, but people are finding them. And so recently in Cincinnati, they've had a couple finds. They've tried to do some survey work to see, okay, is it a population that's building, or is it just this one hitchhiker that has made its way? And, we don't know for sure. And so we know that we're getting these reports from Cincinnati. We've actually last week had a report in downtown Columbus. And today the Ohio Department of Agriculture received a report of a photo of a spotted lanternfly adult on the campus of Ohio State University. And so we think that these are going to continue this fall. And so just be aware of your surroundings. And if you see anything that you suspect, please make that report or give somebody a phone call. We also want to encourage people to spread the word. And so this is kind of your homework. So find something that really kind of hit home with you tonight and take that information and share with others tomorrow or throughout the week that, hey, have you heard about spotted lanternfly? You really need to learn more about it. I'm willing to mail out spotted lanternfly cards to help you with that message. And I think a great place to have one of those displays would be at Ottawa Wildlife Refuge. And so I will make sure that one of those gets out there real soon. Also, alert us in extension to opportunities. We were talking before the webinar began about Bug Fest. So an event that our metro parks in Lucas County recently did. And that was one of the activities that we had, and the information that we distributed was about spotted lanternfly. And so if you have other nature related, or maybe not even nature related, but we could reach a lot of people about this insect, we would love to be part of that and spread that word. Be on the lookout for this insect and report anything that you think might be spotted lanternfly. And then report. So report Tree of Heaven if you're using the Great Lakes Early Detection app. Report negative finds of spotted lanternfly. And then unfortunately, if you do find something that you think is spotted lanternfly, make sure that you report that as a suspect that then we can verify. I know that we finished a little early, but I always like to do that whenever possible, because I want to make sure that we open it up. And I think maybe there are some comments or questions in the chat box. And so as I open that up.
Yeah, we got one from Tom Romino, Amy, and he asked, if we can capture the insect alive, what should we do with it?
Okay, so there's a couple different options. One is if you have alcohol, rubbing alcohol, you can put that in a jar of rubbing alcohol to preserve it. You could also place it in a container and put that in your freezer and keep it in the freezer until we can make that connection where we want to get that, that confirmation done. So those are the two options as far as trying to capture and contain the insect.
Tom asked another question. He says, what else is being done to eradicate the fly?
So that's a really good question. So there are things that are being done to manage this insect. So I don't think that there's anybody who's been working on spotted lanternfly that will say that this insect can be totally eradicated or eliminated. But we can do things to manage this insect. And so one of those things is to first find the population when levels are low. So that kind of goes along with identification and reporting. As Pennsylvania moved into the scraping of the egg masses and stomping and squishing them, I mean, that could be another part of it. There are traps that people can put up. There's some that are commercially available. There's some that you can do it yourself. They're pretty easy with hardware cloth and a container that then captures them. It's not going to rid a property of them, but it may reduce populations. It's also used for monitoring in states where it's not as widespread. So physically removing any stage of the insect is recommended once we have that confirmation. There are chemical treatments that could be made to protect certain plants in the landscape. If you have grapes or own a vineyard, they are going to be making insecticide applications to protect their crops. We've had some really great researchers work on when the best time to make those applications are. They've made observations of where the insects tend to be, which is usually on the outer edges of the vineyards. So with proper management, it can be managed or maintained at levels that are not disruptive. But with that said, there are vineyards in Pennsylvania that had high populations that weren't managed, and that in connection or at the same time as a polar vortex, when we had really bad winter conditions, they lost their entire crop or their entire field. And so it's not something to take lightly, especially if you grow grapes or have a vineyard. So those are kind of the management tools that are at our hands. The other good news is that it is pretty easy to kill the insect, but because of the span of when they're present, it's usually not a one treatment and they're gone. You might have to make re-applications. And so we want to make sure that we're just doing that smartly, right? So we're having less of an impact on other insects that might be out in the environment at the same time, and, you know, being protective of our pollinators and those other beneficials. Any other questions that may have come to mind or that you wanted me to kind of repeat? Please note that, you know, grab my email and my phone number. And if you have other questions that you think of, you know, down the line, or have some opportunities that we could partner and do some additional outreach, I would love to hear from you.
This is TJ. We'll email you the request to send those documents over to Ottawa. We can place them at our visitor center.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy, for doing this.
Absolutely.
Amy, would you please put in the chat room the link for what we are to do with our data on your web? I guess it's your website.
For the Department of Agriculture?
Yes, please.
Yes, I will definitely do that. So that's the ODA website. And then I will also I can share the link for the fact sheet. There we go. And there's the link for the fact sheet.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I really appreciate everybody's time. It is important that we're on the lookout for this insect to protect agriculture, and really the environment, because when an invasive comes in, it can really throw off that natural system. And so whatever we can do to be proactive and to find these populations at low levels before we have these huge outbreaks is going to be really important.
Well, thanks a lot. I look forward to sharing this in our local community. There's a Paw Paw Festival here in the Athens area tomorrow, and I'm going to see if I can get these printed out and put them up on the bulletin board there. Those are all conservation-minded people into agriculture and nature, so we'll do our best to spread the word. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
If there's not any more questions, just want to thank you again, Amy, for doing this. And if you guys are interested in more events, we on the Friends website, we have a whole list of our events that's going on. We have the wildlife drive this month, and we have our very own Tom Romito going to do a presentation the 24th of this month. So we would love to see you in person and online. And I hope everyone has a good evening.
Thank you, Amy. Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Good night.
Yeah.